calls of earlier mistakes, although they're outside of people's control, when it may not be best for the city or its residents long term. So I just want to put another third, maybe newer outsider opinion in front of the committee for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Paul Foster.
Just keep track. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. And we'll go back to our agenda and our business at hand. Any other, I don't know if that spurred any other questions among our board members.
I guess they're referring to these, the purchases of these blighted properties and everything as investments. It's not meant to,
Exactly.
these properties weren't meant to buy these cash cows. They were crap properties bringing blight to the city. It wasn't, we weren't trying to buy this thing for $400,000 and sell it for $2.3 million. It was to get some of this blight out of the city, right?
That's exactly
I mean, that's the deal with a lot of these. They were never meant to make a profit. It was meant to get something developed on there, something good developed on there for the most part, right?
That's true.
Of which goes on the city's tax digest, and none of those benefits flow back to the development authority.
Right.
So when those properties are redeveloped and they go on the tax digest, the taxes are levied at, for all the various taxes. City gets their tax at their millage rate. None of that flows back to the development authority for the use of paying our bond. So the city's got the revenue, and we've got the bond. So it's easy to jump on and say that when in fact I wasn't on the board at the time, but had some of those decisions, but had some of those decisions not been made, there probably would not be a lot of the development that's in the city now. I mean, particularly the Virginia Park area. Had Airport View still been sitting over there, I'm not sure there'd be very many of the people who live there now that would live there, or Tight Pockets, or any of those properties. But anyway.
I just wanted to clarify that because they weren't purchased to make a profit for the city or anything. It was to get rid of
Gino's Motel,
prostitution
those kind of
and
things.
all this other
Well,
stuff.
I was on the development authority when most of these properties that you see on the books were bought, at least some of them. And what they're saying is exactly right. It's a bit of a social engineering, if you will, in order to take out the bad stuff and put in some new. And it is true that we paid our money, that is the development authority fund money, for those properties. We sold them at a loss in most cases. And as Katrina says, the tax revenue flows to the city. If the development authority cannot pay its bonds, then obviously it's going to affect the credit of the city. So while we are an independent entity, we are in fact tied at the hip. And that's why we need a revenue stream from time to time, or else we're not going to be able to make those bond payments, as we have not been able in the past, and the city has loaned us money. So all of the revenue that we're generating through the cash flow of some of these propositions that we have heard lately would be an attempt to generate a revenue stream in order for us to pay our own bonds, so the city doesn't have to give us the money to pay those bonds. So it's well intended in that respect. I've been on this thing a fairly long time, and there's no attempt here that I know of, that I've been aware of, to do anything other than to keep the high view and the high road as far as trying to redevelop the city of Hapeville, to guide redevelopment. We don't sell properties to people. We sell ideas and developments, improvements, and that's what we're here for. We do from time to time act as a conduit for the city, because there's some things that the city can't do that we can help them do, and we have served as a conduit for that. So we're in it together, and it's all for the betterment of our city. That's the way I look at it, and 100% sure these other people do too, and those people who have served on these boards in times past. Now, this doesn't address your little question about the resolution and all that, but that's just the
more than
background.
what I was hearing.
Yeah.
These investments have gone bad, that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's
I
just not what it was for.
I would like to say something on that. I think these investments have gone incredibly well. I was here at the beginning. I don't think you were on the Development Authority when I first came, but you were here in town, of course. And Katrina was one of our first home buyers when we built new houses, but we renovated. And I can tell you right now, nobody would be living in Virginia Park unless they could live nowhere else, because that's the status of the neighborhood when I moved here and this started. And it is only because of the investment of the Development Authority that that's a great neighborhood now. The house that I live in was abandoned with the prostitute who used the front room for her business, and all of her stuff was in there. The back room was injection drug users. The other side of Margaret Street, every house was empty. Half of the lot still had houses, but they were burned out. Development Authority bought houses where the people were heating the house by opening the stove. I mean, the neighborhood was an absolute disaster, and this would not have happened without an investment from the Development Authority. Has that investment paid off? I would say yes. I think that's what
I think
kicked
the way you're
off.
saying, yeah, I think the way that,
Yeah.
like this, we're not in it for development.
No, I
we're
agree
in it
with
for
you.
money.
I agree,
Yeah,
that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. The whole point
Right.
was, I don't think it's appropriate for a city's development authority to be out trying to game the real estate system to make money or whatever. It should be trying to serve to prime the pump for redevelopment, and that's what it did. And I'm incredibly proud of what's been accomplished. There would be no Corner Tavern up there if the old shopping center was still there in those pieces of property. I don't think without that happening in Virginia Park that there would have been any of this redevelopment in the other city. I don't think there would have been a Porsche or any of these things. All of these things built on each other to create a place. I wonder if you would agree with that as a developer. I mean, when you see where this is cascaded across, and that is strictly because of what the Development Authority did. So I don't think
sometimes
there's
it's
anything to
taken-
be ashamed of, but to be very proud of how we've turned around a city that was going downhill on roller skates, honestly, 15 years ago. It was economically ready to crash, and the last of the people leave. And you turned it around and made it into a great city.
Well, and
I didn't intend to
it's
imply that
taken
I felt
quite some
anything.
time, more so than probably anyone anticipated, because there was a time, the real estate market's a cyclical thing. For example, Gino's Motel was taken down, probably one of the, I wasn't here then, but from what I've seen and heard from people who were, it was bad. And, so there were some condo units built there. Just now, the second phase of that is being developed. And then, how many units are going in there, David, do you know?
6.
6, and 3 or 4 are already under contract, and they aren't even built yet. So, some of these investments have taken longer, and as I would think a lot of people that have made some real estate investments can tell you that some of them have taken longer than anticipated, because I don't think anyone anticipated the downturn that we experienced and expected it to last as long as it did. And so we have done some great things.
But I want to say something about that too. We survived the downturn where a lot of the neighborhoods just north of us in South Atlanta took a big dip. Now our values went down, but there were no boarded up houses in Virginia Park, the new houses and things. Everybody stayed put, and it was because we had gotten good quality development led by the Development Authority ahead of time. And so you had people that loved the neighborhood, and they hung on until they could sell when things turned around.
Okay, Paul had raised his hand.
Sorry, I
I
just
see you,
wanted,
George, but
just
he had
wanted
raised
to,
his hand first.
just wanted to clarify, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that the gentleman said and wasn't trying to imply to the contrary. Specifically looking at this deal that was meeting was called for tonight, it seems to me, as was mentioned, that it was called in more of a short fashion than typically. The documents that the public may have been able to see as normal, we weren't able to, and it's not even necessarily, I think, the Development Authority or this specific development is an issue or doing something incorrectly. It's just that due process that we should have to review that and have all of the facts laid in front of us doesn't seem to be here, and also there doesn't seem to be a large adverse effect to doing something this evening to allow those documents in time to be presented to everybody. So I wasn't trying to disparage anybody here or the community in general. I don't know if it came across that way, just asking for time, which it seems like there's plenty of, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
With all due respect, we're a little off topic here. Nobody came here to say anything about you guys not doing great for the city.
But there were negative comments about our prior investments, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, but that wasn't meant to you know, I mean, that's not the question. The question is, that the last time this happened, we didn't know anything about it, and then we had to go to challenge the thing, because we were going to be stuck with paying 55% of legal fees. I understand that's not going to happen here, right?
That's correct.
Right.
That's true. Okay. So, but we didn't know that. It was already in the hands, and that's why we had to intervene in court. All we're asking, Brendan is asking, is for us to see this stuff ahead of time. And I think that's transparency. But, and the other thing is, if you guys don't know that in the other bond, the intergovernmental agreement was not validated by the court, I think you need to find out what that means in terms of how money is being spent. I'm not sure, but I think you might want to look at the bond. Have you read the bond transcript from the last one? The transcript of the bond hearing.
I have not. I've relied on our advisor.
I think you might want to start looking at these things. I'm not criticizing, okay? But we had to go through a lot of personal stuff just to save this city money from the last bond transaction. And then I find out that I'm going to be harassed in court without you even knowing about it. I mean, they went down and misrepresented you, Mr. Fincher and Mr. Denmark.
Who is they?
Mr. Fincher and Mr. Denmark.
Okay. I want to.
I don't know.
I need to know all.
If you didn't know that, well, Brendan presented all that to you in that July 10th hearing.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a misrepresentation at court by them.
Okay, Jennifer's reminding me that I am out of order because we moved away.
Sorry
from
about
public
that.
comment.
If I was got a little hot under the collar before, it's that we have gone through a lot.
Okay. But I am out, we did move out of public
The,
comment, so.
The intergovernmental agreement was not validated because the court had no jurisdiction to validate the intergovernmental agreement. The intergovernmental agreement was not security for the bonds that were issued for the Solis Hotel. The court only has jurisdiction to validate the bonds and the security for those bonds. And because the intergovernmental agreement was not security for the bonds, the court had no jurisdiction. Now, we didn't even present it to the court. The interveners came in and presented that to the court.
Is it your opinion that the intergovernmental agreement that we're referencing is a valid agreement, a legally binding agreement?
I think it is, but they're correct. It could be challenged for as long as it's in effect by any
Sure.
citizen. But if it's
Anything can be
if it's challenged and invalidated, that just means that the money stays with statutory development authority.
That's not what the papers say.
We just sign another one.
Yeah,
That-
right.
Okay.
So,
Okay. No, we're in the board discussion, so Jennifer got me back on track, so.
so if I can ask a
Yes.
question to that point. So, if I understand correctly, so the, how do I say, the intergovernmental transfer agreement wasn't approved by that court because they didn't have jurisdiction.
Right.
Who would be the authority that would need to approve, if any?
Oh, it's like any other contract that a court only approves contracts when bonds are issued in these validation proceedings. They validate the contracts so the contracts plays as security for the bonds, so the bond owners have peace of mind that those contracts won't be challenged over the life of the bonds. That intergovernmental agreement was just like any other contract entered into governmental bodies. You don't go to court to approve a contract. You enter into a contract, and if one of the parties thinks it's not valid or a citizen doesn't think it's valid, then potentially you end up in court litigating over that contract, just like any other contract.
But every contract you do, you don't go to the court and get a.
Right, you don't go
through it,
yeah.
yeah.
The only approvals that were required were the governing bodies of the parties that entered into the contract, had to vote to authorize the officers to sign the contract.
But when I'm not an attorney, when I read that,
So, any other questions from the board members? You look like you're about to ask something.
Well, I'm, if we delay this, then it's gonna be litigated in the court of public opinion for some period of time. We're gonna come back to the same meeting with probably a full board, and we'll vote on it again. So I'm of the opinion that we should move forward with it.
Well, and we had a full, I have to look back at the minutes to see who wasn't here, but we did have more than us when we created the memorandum of understanding and voted for that, which this supports that the board previously agreed to.
Do we have a resolution, do we have the resolution we're supposed to adopt here? Is there actually
I could,
And
the,
it's right here.
so Series
It's
2017
in-
bond,
this
that's
would have
it.
been in those documents. It's called, yeah, it's called Series 2017 Bond Resolution.
Okay, I'm not finding the resolution.
This is second one, she said, the bond 2017 current report.
I have printed mine because until I like to have it where I can write notes on it.
It's the first one. Do you want to see that?
I remember seeing it now. I was thinking this was, okay, so before us is the option to either move and either pass this or not pass it tonight. That's what this is all about.
That's
That's
correct.
what it comes down to.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have any, well, this is your, you need to ask if anybody else have anything.
Yeah, I'm just kind of giving everybody time to think through everything. Make sure you have any questions. We certainly have Earl and Ed here to answer.
Well, hearing none from the board, then, in order to get this to the end, one way or the other, I would move the adoption of the resolution as presented and authorize the chair to sign the appropriate papers for all these documents.
Is there a second to that motion?
That's my only hesitation.
Is because you're concerned that somebody's gonna
Because
intervene?
the way
I
the
think they made it
last
clear
thing-
they're gonna
Yeah, the way
intervene.
the last thing went down. And what's the, I guess what's the harm and if we did, who's harmed if we waited to let them look through it?
Well,
I
can we,
mean, who's really,
I feel like in that meeting we sat through.
Scott.
Scott, you presented us with kind of a timeline. Could you kind of,
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
wait a minute, we have a
I
motion.
think a point of order
We have
would
a
be that
motion here on the floor.
if it may die from a lack of second, then you could
Yeah.
declare that so if that's the case.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Sorry.
nobody's gonna
So
second.
no
in
one,
order to
so
get
we
it on
don't
the
have a
floor.
second? All right. Then the motion dies.
I think building off what he said, you kind of presented us with a timeline having to do with like when you needed things. Could you just kind of briefly, do you mind going over that kind of?
I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, do you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So, Scott Condra, the
Sorry, honey.
developer. No, that's not a problem. So I think as we've talked about before, and by the way, I've been involved with this community for 8 years now with the purchase of the former Ford plant when it closed. And I will just make a commentary that it has been a challenge. This community has been a challenge to brought together an investment group for $50 million at that time in 2008. And a lot of people lost money. It was a challenging time for this community. But the community has taken steps to improve it, and and I believe in this community. I've worked here now for 8 years, and hopefully it has been very positive. First bringing Portia here, that was not our original plan, but I think ultimately it's worked out well. The Solis Hotel. This hotel, unlike Solis, because of the challenge, our attorneys, the city's attorneys, feel like it's a very valid structure. That's why we're using it. We wouldn't do otherwise. But as I explained, we've done a lot of work just to address one issue about the appraisal or the valuation. We have done the upfront work, but because of the challenge before with Solis, we are not proceeding with this project until it is validated. So if portions of the community want to stop this or want to review it, all that's fine with us. But the project will not proceed. The investment will not be made in this community. I mentioned before that Akron, when they purchased the Solis property, worked an agreement with Portia to deed restrict this property. So nothing else will go on this land, as we talked about before. The reason for the abatement is to abate the noise, just like in Solis, so that it's comparable to sleeping environment facilities. So we have gone through the initial process to see about a bank to invest a construction loan, and also Akron has said they're interested in providing the portion of the equity. We would provide the other portion. I say all that as background in that we've held back of doing anything else. We've had initial concepts drawn. We've had architects, engineers look at what is needed to abate the noise. We've had general contractors come in and give us competitive pricing. And we've had an appraisals done by third parties that we would give to the bank. But we're not proceeding until this next step is done and the subsequent step of the validation. And if not, the property will sit there, as I said. So now directly to the question of timing. It is totally up to you to delay or not, but we did lay out a timeline. And we talked to banks and the other investors about that timeline. I think the risk right now, I will tell you from my perspective, of further delay in this process, is that if you look at where the economy is, and I hear this all the time, that the banks, the ability to have bank loans for hospitality is decreasing considerably. And we could talk about broadly why that is, but I think it's where we are in this real estate cycle. And so it has already been a challenge somewhat to get the interest in things. So it's another risk if we continue to delay this, that it will be until the next cycle. That's just what I've heard since we've gone out in the last several weeks. So I would ask that, personally, I would ask that we go forward as the schedule we laid out, but I understand it's your decision. I just, I want to lay out those risks if we don't at this point. Does that answer your question?
Scott, can I ask you to address the assessed value, that the figures that you guys brought up and how you calculated? Because I think you had given us some good data the last time we met for the benefit of the group, and just to refresh our memories, can you tell us how you came up with that assessed value why you felt that that was a solid or reasonable number of what could be realized.
So, first you look at what the cost would be, so the total cost. And just to be clear, that base amount, the $25 million, is the total cost for the project. So if you look at the land, you look at all the things to build that facility, that's where the 25 million comes in.
And Madam Chair, I want to talk about it, I do tax abatement transactions for East Point, Clayton, Cab, Brookhaven, College Park, on hotels. Most developers come to me and argue that a hotel is worth less than cost because the tax assessor assesses it way less than cost because it's based on income. It's based on how many rooms they rent, the occupancy rate, and so they all come to me and show me that comparable hotels are less than the cost to build it. And so when he came to me and agreed to do it at cost, I jumped on it and didn't, because other developers pressed me to actually set the tax abatement schedule on a number less than cost. So I felt like we were getting a good deal to do it at cost.
And Ed brings up an excellent point, and the only reason we agreed to do that is the synergy with Solis. Is that you've got all those facilities of the 4-star hotel that are built there. This will be a mid-scale for a different product. So we feel like if it's built close to it at the same time, it'll serve a different segment and take advantage of those. Where, even if you built it across the tracks, you wouldn't have that synergy. So that was the reason.
Well,
You are out of
I mean, if you wanna make a motion to amend the agenda to move back to public comment, we can do that.
We can't hear what you're
You wanna make that
saying.
motion?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to go back and get public comment.
Second?
Okay. Any thoughts, discussions, questions on it?
Um,
All right. Wait a minute, let's vote. All in favor? Okay.
I was just gonna ask you how fast a reader are you if you get all this stuff and
Oh, yeah, I mean,
quickly you plan on going through it and everything.
I mean-
So we're not throwing the timeline off too much.
well,
You know,
it takes 3 days, or at least 3 days to get the documents
Okay.
on schedule to be, and then occasionally, it's a week after that before they're actually produced.
Okay.
If I do an open records request, I mean, if somebody just wants to send me everything, I can just look at it. So, I mean, basically, I just want to clarify, when we talked about the stream of revenue that the Development Authority needs, and the Madam Chair said we had some, and we did have a downturn economically, and so I wasn't trying to slough off on the Development Authority. That could happen to anybody. It's just describing what's going on as far as needing to get, and like I said, it can be for great reasons, or you could feel like they weren't such great reasons, but those reasons being on the table, and then maximizing the dollars from the developer is all I'm talking about. In other words, if you're talking about tax abatement, you're talking about potentially a lot of tax savings over the course of this thing, and I just want to know what numbers we're comparing to what, whether anybody, and you heard, Mr. Wall's description of how the valuation comes to him. The valuation is an agreement between Mr. Wall and Mr. Condra. That's it. And I mean, that was just described before you right here. And what I'm saying is, let's have a little more information on that. And if that's the basis for the valuation, is a couple of guys, granted with lots of experience, talking about, oh, what's this thing going to be worth when it's done? is that a basis for actually comparing and making statements about tax abatement and making statements about how much extra you're going to be generating for the authority versus what would go into the general fund if it was done the other way? Because let's face it, if let's say the hotel's worth $50 million in 20 years down the road. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying what you do when you do a bond is you don't allow the tax assessor of Fulton County to assess the property during the life of the bond. The payment stays the same, no matter if the value goes through the roof or if it goes in the tank. They agreed to that payment. So there is some downside hedging also that could be a positive for the taxpayer. I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is that the people that are interested in these things haven't had a chance to look, and thank you for your question. It won't take me long to review it once I can look at it. But I mean, in other words, the procedure for me looking at it actually takes longer than me looking at it. Me looking at it takes about a day. And me getting the stuff takes, I mean, you'd have to ask Jennifer, so.
So realistically, because he may be the only, I mean, I don't want us to make a decision just solely based on you, Brendan, so I want it to be something that's, if we make a decision, what is a realistic time? Anyone who wants to see the thing for her, to have a chance to look at it, what would be an acceptable amount of time, so that we're not just leaving him flailing out in the wind, and we've given them an appropriate amount of time, like, we need to set a time frame on this,
So
and what is an appropriate amount of time, that's what I'm curious about.
So let-
Okay, so what he's talking about is the length of time that it would take for,
Is he gonna have to do an open records request, or can we,
or-
I don't know, is he gonna have to do an open records request? Okay, so how,
Unless
You
you want
guys-
to post the document.
I wanna know your turnaround
If-
time, from your version of the turnaround time for an open records
But
request.
these documents are not secret documents, are they? I mean,
You should instruct Earl to email them to him.
If you instruct me, I can
I
email the
mean, there's no
document.
secret here that I'm aware of.
No.
There's a secret they haven't told me, okay?
I can have
There's
it-
just,
We're
Mr. Poole, there's just nowhere to go get the documents.
I can
Well, I
have
wanna
it.
hedge,
Set a timeline
I
here.
also wanna I wanna go again, he may not be, Brendan, I don't want us to just email it to
Email it
Brendan
to
and then we're
Brendan,
done. We need to put it out there for,
Of course.
so someone, yeah, I just
Of
wanna know, how are we gonna do that? How is that, what does that look like, how are we gonna do it, and how quickly can we?
so let's let
Make a
Jennifer answer
motion.
the question.
Yes.
Make a motion. Make a motion.
Well,
Let's
I
just
want
let
her
Jennifer
to- I
answer
want
the
her to
question we
answer my
asked her
question.
first,
Yeah.
okay, and then we can figure out what to do.
So these are public documents, unless the board gives them to him directly, or to anyone that asks for them directly. If they ask for them from this board, then they will have to file open records request. These are part of the public documents, and they are part of this agenda, if you guys want to forward the documents to me, I will be glad to post them with the agenda tomorrow, as soon as I get them to work.
so we can do it that way without having to do an open
Because I
records
think it's a
request.
valid, Tanya has a valid comment there that it's not a matter of just